Charles' close encounter with death all started at a nearby roller skate rink called World on Wheels in LA County. Every Monday night, World on Wheels would host a gospel event, inviting churches in the surrounding areas to come together in fellowship under one roof. The church Charles attended joined in with other member churches to enjoy an evening of fun. 6 members from Charles' church decided to go together. It was 3 guys and 3 girls. Charles and one of the girls in the group had vehicles, so they both drove. The guys rode with Charles, and the girls drove in a different car. They chose to meet up at a central location before driving to World on Wheels. Around 20 minutes later, they arrived at the roller skate rink, so they parked their cars in the lot and then walked inside to join in the festivities. After 2 hours of skating, laughing and playing video games in the arcade, Charles and the other people he came with decided to leave the rank a bit early to grab a quick bite. So they walked back to their parked vehicles and then drove off in pursuit of a place to eat. Fortunately for them, late that evening, a fast food hamburger restaurant with its dining room area was still open for service. So they parked their cars and then walked inside to order their food. Shortly after finishing their meals, they walked outside back to their cars, but before leaving the restaurant, they hung out for several minutes, engaging in friendly conversation. All of a sudden, on the other side of the parking lot, 2 suspicious men were lurking. They were coming out of a dark alley, maybe 100 feet from where Charles and his friends were standing. And then, all at once, one of the guys standing in the dark walked towards them, and then pulled out his handgun. Without question, his sudden reaction caused panic in their group. Needless to say, everyone there ran for cover behind their cars in the fast food parking lot, except for Charles. For some strange reason that night, he wasn't afraid. He stood his ground as this hoodlum pointed his weapon at Charles and then shot him point blank in the neck and the forearm. Instantly he collapsed to the pavement after feeling the impact of the bullets hitting his body. Charles couldn't believe what was happening to him. His entire life began to flash before his eyes in a matter of seconds. It all seemed surreal to him. He couldn't tell the difference if he was awake or dreaming, yet it felt to him he was stabbed with a razor-sharp instrument. Neither could Charles get up to defend himself from this guy. It was hopeless. Showing no compassion or remorse for his life, the gunman stood over Charles while he lay on the ground and then shot him a 3rd time in the stomach. It was apparent to Charles that his assailant was demonically enhanced. A thirsty murderer looking for a blood sacrifice before the break of dawn. In the book of Ephesians, chapter 6, verse 12, it says, "For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places." It's evident that an evil spirit from the pits of hell took possession of this young, misguided soul's mind, transforming this guy into a ruthless killer. After accomplishing his task for Satan, the gunman cowardly left the scene of the crime. Both Charles' attacker and his accomplice vanished back into the dark alley without a trace, leaving Charles for dead on the fast food hamburger restaurant's parking lot, bleeding to death. In the book of 2 Corinthians, chapter 5, verse 5, it says, "We are confident, I say, and willing rather to be absent from the body and to be present with the Lord." This passage of Scripture basically means that the human spirit leaves the physical body to return back to God. Charles totally understood this Bible verse clearly, even as a child. However, at the age of 20 years old, He wasn't ready to die. Not just yet. Not like this. Charles felt his spirit alive inside his body, fighting for dear life. But his eyelids were getting heavier and heavier as the moments passed. He knew it was because of excessive blood loss that his eyes wanted to close, but Charles couldn't allow his eyes to close. He just might not wake up again, ever. While laying there on the pavement, Charles suddenly felt hands grabbing and pulling on his body from both sides, lifting him to his feet. As his eyelids gradually began to open wider, Charles noticed it was two of his male friends who came to his rescue. They slowly walked him to his silver 1984 Toyota Celica hatchback, opened the door and then placed him in the back seat. With no time to lose, they took him to Daniel Freeman Hospital, a few blocks away from where the shooting incident occurred. Charles' friend, who was behind the wheel of his car, was driving like a madman, to say the least. Thank God very few motorists were on the road at that time, so early in the morning. It felt as if they were on a high-speed chase, evading the police or something like it, frantically driving through the streets of LA, running red lights, turning corners at full speed, never letting up off the accelerator. By the time Charles and his friends arrived at the hospital's emergency entrance, the white pants Charles was wearing were covered in blood. Plus the pain Charles felt was so overwhelming, the thought of passing out would be expected. And then he heard the sound of the tires burning rubber as they slid to an immediate stop. Both Charles' friends jumped out of the vehicle almost simultaneously and then took him out of the back seat of his car. Using extreme caution, they walked him one step at a time towards the emergency entrance of the hospital. Charles' friends continued to move him through the automatic glass doors and then sat him down on the nearest chair available. By the grace of God, two nurses spotted Charles slumped over on the chair in excruciating pain. Without any hesitation, the nurses ran to where they were gathered to give him all the medical attention he could possibly need. The nurses positioned themselves on either side of him while he remained seated on the chair. Together they placed their arms under his arms and then stood up, which forced Charles to stand up as well. Moments later, he was put on a hospital gurney and then was pushed down a long hallway, which was dimly lit. However, Charles saw in the distance two swinging doors. He instinctively knew that behind these double doors was the surgery room. The nurses and Charles finally went through the double doors into the surgery room. They took him off the hospital gurney and then laid him on his back, on top of the cold stainless steel surgical table. Charles had to exercise great patience as he lay there, waiting to go under the knife. Meanwhile, as Charles lay flat on his back, staring into the bright lights above him, he felt his right forearm feeling numb from his assailant's bullet. Rigor mortis started to set in. Charles thought to himself, "I guess this is how it feels when your body begins to die." After the thought of dying entered Charles' head, the doctors instantly came into the surgery room. The surgeon's medical assistants placed a gas mask over Charles' nose and mouth, and then they told him to count backwards from 10 to 0. He can only recall reaching the number 7, and then he fell into a state of deep unconsciousness. Charles was comatose. Several hours later, after the surgery, Charles woke up in a hospital bed in the intensive care unit. The first thing he recognized was how bright the lights were in that room. And then he heard the sound of the heart monitor next to him beeping rapidly. Charles also heard the ICU medical staff conversing with each other around him. And then Charles began to feel the after effects from the surgery he had on his neck, stomach and forearm. He noticed a long plastic tube inserted in his nose and down his throat, making it very difficult to swallow. The doctors also had him hooked up to an IV, intravenously feeding him through his vein. This was the worst feeling Charles had ever experienced up to this point in his short life. As he lay there on the hospital bed, trying to find a position of comfort, he began to sense other people in the room, besides the medical staff. Charles wanted to see who else was in the ICU ward with him, so he gradually turned his head to the left. And, to his surprise, the entire room was filled to capacity with patients recovering from various types of injuries. Even though Charles was feeling heavily sedated from the drugs the doctors administered to him, he realized he was still alive. "Thank God," Charles said to himself. "I am still alive." He made it through this tragic ordeal with his life still intact. All praise, glory, and honor goes to the Most High God and His dear Son, Jesus Christ. Days later, the doctors transferred him from the ICU ward to eventually having a regular hospital bed to rest for the remainder of his stay. While Charles was in his room, he wondered, why did God allow me to get shot when I didn't do anything wrong? I wonder what was the lesson I was to learn. I wonder. In 1994, exactly 7 years after his recovery, God inspired Charles to write a song. When Charles heard this word of inspiration from the Lord, he was confused. First of all, he thought, why would God tell me to write him, God, a song, when I'm not a songwriter? Charles had no idea how to write a song. He thought to himself, maybe I misunderstood what God told me. Many weeks had passed and Charles still felt a burning urge in his heart to write God a song. So finally, after weeks of battling in his mind about writing a song for God, he just took action and put pen to paper. But little did he know when he made the decision to start writing, God began downloading lyrics to him, a little bit at a time, until the lyrics were completed. It took Charles approximately 12 months to write this song for God. This song ended up being 6 minutes long. Charles also wrote a powerful introduction preceding presentation of the song.